Boaz Ashkenazy, it's great to have you on Paper Napkin Wisdom. Welcome.
Oh, and thank you. I'm excited. This will be a fun
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah, I'm jazzed to have you here. Uh, and so you shared with me an interesting paper napkin. I want to jump right in. I'm going to read it,
Sure.
and it says, "The future belongs to those that ask the right questions, not to those that have the answers." And that's very near and dear to my heart. I love this paper
Yeah.
napkin. It could be mine. So why did you share that with me?
Well, I think that I find that throughout life, curiosity is one of those things that I've always had. I'm always very interested in other people. And so when I get into conversations, I'm sure like you do too with these podcasts, I'm really fascinated by people's lives and by people's jobs and what they're doing. And so I tend to ask a lot of questions. And what I notice is that that's uncommon. I also noticed that in the business world, there's more talking and there's less listening. And so I just think that as a rule, I like to be more curious and listen more than I talk.
And okay, so what's fun about what you said is you're fascinated, you're curious about the lack of curiosity, right? You were fascinated by the
Yeah.
lack of curiosity, which is in itself kind of interesting and revealing about were you always like that? Was that the way you were as a kid or
I think so. Nowadays I have a podcast like you do, and I end up interviewing people and I listen and I talk and so on. But yeah, I've always, with younger friends and as a child, just always kind of not been the one at the center of the room talking and telling jokes, but be more the one kind of on the side asking questions and listening and digging into what people are doing. And I think to a point where it can be off-putting in some ways because it's so unusual that people are like,
why all
why
the
are you asking
questions?
so many questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why are you asking so many questions?
Well, I think it comes from it's an authentic curiosity about things and about people. And yeah, I just find that I find folks fascinating. And so I'm I'm looking to kind of dig in to what they're doing and find out kind of what makes them tick.
Yeah. And were you like that even so for me, though I was always curious, I was happy to fill the blank space in my late teens, early 20s. Were you like that? Or would you just remain curious the whole way, do you think?
As I got older, I got much more comfortable presenting and talking about different subjects. And so I would fill the void in different ways. And so now, I think it's much more balanced, but
Yeah.
I still think it's coming from a place of curiosity. And I think that people that I've really liked in the media over the years are folks that have interview shows and are really, really good at doing interviews.
Yeah.
Like Oprah Winfrey good at doing interviews,
Yeah.
where they're doing research, but they're also kind of in the moment, really kind of finding ways to dig in and understand which way to take the conversation. I just think that's fascinating.
Isn't that interesting though, right? Because there is a balance between being prepared and being open.
Hmm.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah, and also being able to kind of understand where to take the conversation.
What does that
It's
mean?
one thing to ask questions based on your research. Hey, tell me about this, tell me about that.
Yeah.
But it's another to be able to listen actively and then take it in another direction that you may have not thought you were going to go when you kind of came into the interview.
Yeah,
And,
it's
and
so
I, some of folks that are listening to this may know that, I have a podcast also called Shift AI, and it's an interview show, and it's pretty structured. I ask very similar questions to folks every single time. But there's moments where things get uncovered and we like to kind of go in directions that we didn't think we were going to go. And I just always think that's the most interesting part.
yeah. Yeah. Isn't that where, you know, people give themselves in those moments, right? You
Mhm.
actually get to see somebody as opposed to maybe just learn something. You're learning
Yeah.
about someone, right?
And ultimately, the truth is that everybody wants to talk about themselves, but it's rare that if people ask with, ask them questions and really care about what they're saying. Most people are just waiting till they're done talking so they can start talking themselves.
Do you think that's true of you said everyone wants to talk about themselves? Do you think that's true of even the most introverted person in your experience?
I think so.
Yeah.
I
So
think
what
so. I
about
think people are hungry to be able to tell their story.
hungry to be able to tell? I love that. Um, why don't they?
Well, I think in some ways it's because nobody asks. And in other ways, a lot of people don't have practice or they feel uncomfortable sharing. But most of the time, people don't ask.
And is there and you're saying there's a difference between just asking and being fascinated,
And
right?
genuine.
Right? And there's a
Yeah.
difference between being interested and fascinated, right?
Yeah. 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 And I would say yes. I mean, the energy around fascination is much stronger, but even interested is good enough
Right?
in the world that we live in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Um, because it's so uncommon, and I think you ask great questions. I've had multiple conversations with you and don't tend to ask questions that you don't have to think about.
Yeah.
So because it's uncommon to ask questions, what are some questions that are great places to start? Now, look, you're an entrepreneur, you're a
Yeah.
tech entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
People come to you for your expertise. And and I find it interesting that even though you have a ton of expertise to give, you tend to flip the conversation at the beginning to learn a lot about someone else's lens as it relates to AI, as it relates to the tech that you have deep, deep expertise in.
Yeah.
So you've applied that technology to things as
Hmm.
well as it is as you have to people. So let's go to this uncommonality about asking questions. Where's a good place for people to start? Like even in a business development area where you might have expertise.
Yeah. When I was at Meta, I did a lot of work internally inside the company with lots of
Never
different
heard of that.
departments.
What meta? Meta?
And and part of the job was to uncover problems that these different departments were having and build solutions for them. Some of them were spatial solutions. We built a lot of stuff for our headsets for employees, and some of them were chatbots and other kinds of AI solutions. But they all started from the place of trying to understand what their problems were. And the same thing is true with augmented AI, which is the current business. I would say most of the places that we start is not just diving in and solving problems. We're really sitting down with people and doing business therapy, which is, hey, tell me about what your problems are. Tell me what's going on. Where's the pain? And the reason why I think that's the important place to start is that when you don't have enough pain, you end up falling flat on your face when you build solutions. It happened a lot to us when the name change happened at Meta and everybody in the world wanted a metaverse. Most of the reasons why they wanted a metaverse was because it was optical. There wasn't a lot of pain. There, in certain cases, there was, but for the most part, there wasn't. And once those things got built, which expended a ton of resources, nobody came and they just fell flat. And I find the same thing is true with AI. Everybody thinks AI is this sexy thing. Hey, give me some AI. I need some AI. And they're not thinking about their problems first. Because sometimes it's not a large language model that's going to solve your problem. Sometimes it's just conventional software. Sometimes it's cleaning up your data. I mean, it depends on the situation. And I just think that's always the place to start. Like, where's your challenges? Where's the pain?
Yeah. Is that hard sometimes? Because like let's go back to this meta example, right? Where people are looking for the metaverse and to a certain degree had to deliver something against that pressure, right? There's a lot of pressure to deliver something.
Yeah.
Then you deliver something and nobody wants it or nobody does anything with it.
Yeah.
You know, isn't that the peril of a lot of entrepreneurs? Like you think you're delivering against what somebody wants, and then you do it, and they're like, "Eh, I didn't want
Yeah.
that."
I think you're right. I think that's the hardest thing the hardest thing is to identify that what someone's asking for is not going to work and tell them that they can't have it. I just had to do that recently.
Wow,
And
that is hard, right?
it's
Especially when
hard.
you're building a business, because it's like, oh,
Yeah.
rent is
So,
due and payroll is due,
yeah.
and I
It's
gotta
really hard.
do something.
It's really hard. But I think that the entrepreneurs that stay focused and understand who their real customers are end up winning.
Mhm.
And it's the discipline of being able to say no. It's hard, but I think it's really necessary. And if you ask the right questions, going back to the paper napkin, you're going to know if they're the right customer for you. Like I'll give you an
You're
example.
right for them too. Like that's the other
Both.
side of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Both ways. And sometimes it happens to us in terms of size as it relates to AI. Like someone can have a problem, but the team that has the problem is tiny. And the number of times that this problem happens to them is like once a month. Large language models could solve that problem, but it's just not enough to have an ROI that makes sense.
Mhm.
And so you could take their money, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be successful.
Yeah. So being fascinated, if you can, but at least interested in asking questions. I mean, we're going to talk about the napkin because you talk about the right questions, but let's just say
Yeah.
asking questions, starting with
Yeah.
questions. You can make it bad, make it better, right? You can start with some questions and go from there, right? You may not
Sure.
get the right ones right away, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I like what you talked about business therapy as part of that, right? Finding out what the problem was. How much discipline does it take to stay out of the solution mindset? Because we
Yeah.
like to solve. We like to get that magic wand out and say, I can fix that. But maybe they're asking for something that their friend used or their colleague
Yeah.
or somebody else used. It's not really their problem, but they're skipping to a problem that's familiar because they just want a solution.
Right.
And do you find that happen a lot with AI, especially and new tech in
I think
general?
so. I think so with new tech in general and AI in particular, especially when it's in a hype cycle like it is right now. And I think when people feel pressure, to do something or they don't want to be left behind, that's one of the ways that they go. They've heard about something, they think it's going to work for them, they have some ideas. And I think our technical team is one of the things that I really love about watching them work is that they can be really clear about where large language models and AI apply and when it doesn't, and be honest about that, even if it
Mhm.
means losing the job.
Yeah.
And but to answer your question, I think that the right question to ask is usually why,
Mhm.
and ask that multiple times.
Yeah.
And if you do, like you can just go deeper into the layers of, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. Why? Why are you guys doing it that way? Oh, because this group has this SaaS software and this is kind of the way, these are the limitations of why. Like I think you can kind of go deeper and deeper and deeper and start uncovering some things that then get really interesting. Like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. You guys are doing this manual thing over here because you're trying to ingest this unstructured data in some other way. And like, I think you start to learn more if you kind of hold back a little bit before telling, oh, I got this product and I think I can solve your problem.
Yeah. So you have to not only ask why, because people talk about, oh, I got to ask why 5 times, and they've got a
Right.
formula, and they have little hash marks on the side of their page, right? It's like I asked why once, I asked why twice. Like I'm
Yeah.
on I'm on third why. I'm getting close, right? But you
Right.
have to be interested in why,
Yeah.
right? Because if you're interested in the why, isn't it true that people can tell when you're interested in them, right?
Yeah, I think
Isn't
so.
it true? Like I think that's true.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's true. I
So
think it's
so when
true.
you're
And some people
interested
do
in
it well
asking,
and some people don't.
yeah. So if
But
you're
I
interested
think
in
you're right.
asking questions, then maybe like isn't it true that other people will help you get to the right questions too? Like people
Yeah.
because you said this earlier on. Everybody wants to talk about themselves.
Yeah. And people are, especially if you have a business and you're going through some sort of problem in your business, I mean, you are deep into that problem. You want to talk about it. You want to work through that.
Yeah.
It's just like therapy.
Yeah, I love how you called it business therapy.
It is. It's the same. It's exactly like that.
So
And people open up. They want to talk about it.
how do you know when you've asked enough right questions to get to the place of
That's a
real
good
change?
question. That's a really good question. And I mean, I'm pretty disciplined about it, but I can be kind of loose about it too. And I'm guilty of like wanting to solution also. I know what we're good at. I know what IP we have, and I have that all sitting in my back pocket. I'm listening for that. So I know. And sometimes I want to dive in and say, oh, the problem you're telling me about is super aligned with the stuff that we can roll out. And so I don't know like what the right timing is exactly, but I try to like listen 70% of the time and talk 30% if I can. That's usually a good rule.
Yeah, yeah. I find it really fascinating because you know your IP really well.
Yeah.
You know what AI is and isn't really well. How do you uh, how do you quiet that critic that you have inside of you when a client is asking for something that's just delusional?
I think at this point in our company, I have business partners, and I don't run it by myself, and they are really, really good at holding me to task about what we have and what we offer. And I think
Mhm.
we're different in a lot of ways from your classic product company because we don't really have a product. We have solutions that can
Mhm.
be customized. And some of them have accelerators where we can get to it faster because we've got some IP, and some of them don't. And we're okay solving problems from scratch. But we're also trying to look for commonalities in terms of what people's problems are. And I think in the AI space, we're starting to see that the more people we talk to, the more we realize that they have similar problems in different categories. And that large language models in particular happen to solve those problems really, really well because they're really good at language and because of some of the things they're really good at. And I think I'm kind of listening for those things broadly. I'm not trying to say this is my product and these are the features and this is why you should buy it. And being a solution provider allows you the ability to have that flexibility
Mhm.
versus a business where somebody says, hey, well, can you do this? And you're like, well, that's, it's in the product roadmap, but we're not doing that right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that, I think that waiting, for the opportunities to, suggest some use cases or solutions that might be aligned or make sense is part of the conversation. And it could lead to more questions. So I think it's okay to kind of dive in and do that. But I think to your point before, it's important to have the discipline to to really listen and want to know what's going on inside their business.
Funny that I mean, we've talked about the right questions. We've talked about this whole thing all the way. And now you're talking about use cases. Isn't it, isn't it interesting how most, especially tech companies, sell the use case as opposed to the solution, and they're pitching the use case to people, and it's almost like you're giving everybody a square peg or a
Uh-huh.
square hole and saying, are you able to jam yourself into this?
Hmm. But you're also telling a story,
Yeah.
and people like to hear stories. And people, even though it might not be the story that they fit into, they read into those and then they start saying, oh, well, that's not me exactly, but here's who I am.
Mhm. But you've got to hold
It,
space for that part of it, right?
yeah, you have to.
So, what's one way that you could do that? How could you share a story, a success story, but hold space and not say, this is the be all and end all. This is their problem is your problem.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Lately, this has been happening to me a lot, and I think partly it's because there's a lot of noise in the AI space. But I think that people are really hungry and really want to hear about these use cases because they don't understand exactly how this works. And the
Mhm.
media isn't helping either. The media has painted this picture of you're going to lose your job or the robots are going to take over the world. There's that narrative. And then there's this other thing where people use the term AI as if it's magic, like it's going to solve every problem. Like, hey, I've got this problem in my business and it's some conventional data problem or an automation problem. Can you just AI, let's just do some AI. AI has just become this thing that is just the all encompassing problem solver. And it's just not.
Mhm.
It's incredible, but it's not that. And I think that's the thing that I've been struggling with a little bit is how do you talk about this? What I think about is software 2.0, where like you're doing things that you couldn't do before when you're writing code. Now you can because of these large language models, because of small. But how do you do it in a way that's honest about what the limitations are at this point? And I
Mhm.
think but that's interesting too. That's the conversation because you get to educate a little bit too as you're learning about their business. So you might have like, your question was interesting because, you're going down this journey, you're learning about someone's business. And, they might say something like, well, this certain part of my business is really manual because I'm getting all these documents sent to me and I'm trying to make sense of those documents. I've got all these people trying to make sense of those documents. And in the back of my mind, I think, well, I mean, you can use a large language model to kind of help understand that now in ways that you couldn't before. So maybe we should talk about different kinds of use cases. This may not apply to you, but this is something that we're seeing out there. And inevitably people want to know, what are other people doing
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Successfully.
successfully? How is it working? Even if it's like, I mean, most of the time a lawyer wants to know what another lawyer is doing, but almost always they're thinking about themselves as you're telling them your story.
Yeah.
And so as long as you are not trying to force them into your story, I think it works.
That's really cool because you said earlier on, and we talked about this with curiosity and you being fascinated, and it was uncommon to ask questions. But you talked about how most people are interested in responding, like listening to respond rather than listening to understand or even dig deeper, like to find something that is fascinating enough to ask a second question about or interesting enough to ask another
Yeah.
question about. But isn't it interesting that when you're talking about the story, you're sort of leaning into the fact that people are listening to respond,
Yeah.
so that you can almost use that to get more curious about them, couldn't you?
Yeah. Yeah, you could. And I think we're all guilty of kind of in the back of our minds trying to kind of wait and understand what the next thing is we are going to say. So, we're all guilty of that. But I think that being able to, being able to interview people kind of, I mean, like the practice of having a podcast where you're not expected to be the smartest person in the room is actually really helpful.
Mhm.
You don't feel the pressure to have to be on stage. And, a lot of times when you are in a social situation or in a business situation, you find that there's a lot of people that either like to hear themselves talk or have gotten used to hearing themselves talk. And they could care less about you. You might go a whole conversation. Nobody asks you a thing about your business. I've had that happen to me a ton.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let's talk about that though for a second from another perspective. When you're talking to a client, when you're meeting someone, whether it's a client, whether it's a guest on your podcast on Shift AI,
Mhm.
whatever it happens to be, how do you feel about the people who have all the answers? Like, are they good fits for you all the time, or do you? What's your perspective on how you handle that?
I mean, I like folks that aren't giving me one answer, like one word answers. I
Mhm.
want them to expand on the things that they're working on. So I do want to hear them talk. I try to prod them into places on my podcast where they probably haven't talked about those things for a while or before. And interestingly, I have some questions that I ask again and again and again, where people come back to me later and say, "Man, I've never had somebody ask me that," or I haven't had to answer that question on a podcast. And you know what the one is that And I don't lead the witness on this. People come back to me and ask or tell me this, that, wow, that was a great question, is mentors.
Mm.
Who is a mentor that you had in your life that really, like when you think back, led you to where you are today? People just light up when you ask them that.
Yeah.
You know, the other question is tell me about your family. And when you think about what you're doing now, you know, you're the head of AI at some bank. Did you talk about this kind of stuff with your parents? Were your parents into technology? You know, and sometimes they were and sometimes they weren't. But people really, really light up when they think back about their past and try to make connections to their present. And I don't know if people ask folks enough about that.
But isn't it neat? But both those questions are really where you connect your heart and your head.
Mhm.
And I really believe magic happens when you connect your heart to your head. And, people talk about business being business and
Yeah.
not personal, but everything's personal. And
Yeah.
those are really personal questions that force you to think about and connect
That's
yourself
right.
to something deeper, to your
And it
purpose.
goes back to like, do I like to talk to people that can command a room, or do I like to talk to people that like to hear themselves talk? I do if the answers are are interesting and from the heart. I will listen to them, like, you know, for the show especially. Like I do want to hear about what tech stack you have, and you know, and how you're thinking about AI and how you're integrating it into your company. Like the audience wants to hear about that too.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think they appreciate the human side of some of the questions and answers. And honestly, what, you know, this is kind of going in a different direction, but when I think about the future that we're all about to go embark on, where machines are going to get way smarter than us and faster than us at many, many things, I think we're all going to want to have more human connections.
Yeah.
And part of that is, you know, when two people are sitting here and having a conversation, it goes back to the questions and and digging in.
So is that why you say the future belongs to those that ask the right questions? I mean, you're talking about
Yes.
this as a future focused thing.
I am. I do, and I think it's even more pronounced now. I mean, when I look at my kids and when I mentor university students and so on, I'm thinking about like what it's going to look like
Mm.
when they are older, and it's just going to be very, very different than the work world that you and I have occupied.
Yeah.
And in order for people to survive, they're going to have to figure out ways of differentiating themselves as humans, because all the things that they thought they were really good at before, computers are most likely going to be able to do. And so, yes, I mean, I think that asking the right questions and being curious and being empathetic and connecting with humans and being a good leader, and those are things that are going to be harder for the computer to do.
Yeah.
And so that's why I said that the future is going to belong to folks that can do that kind of stuff.
It's amazing. So if you believe that, how do you, no, not how do you, are you actively teaching this right questions, curiosity, interest, fascination skill to new recruits and ultimately to your kids?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And I think I probably should do a better job of it. I mean, in some ways they see it by example, but I do try to talk about it and, you know, have conversations like we're having. You know, as someone that is a thought leader in the AI space and has a company that builds custom AI solutions and so on, I feel like there's a lot of tension because this technology is really powerful. And when you build things, in some cases, it gets rid of a lot of tasks that humans were doing before. And I hope that it's going to open up the possibility for better leaders, better mentors, better managers, more, you know, chance to strategize and connect, and new jobs that are available to people. But there is a tension between standing up these solutions, which I know are going to make businesses much, much more efficient, and make and shrink them, or make them punch above their weight in ways that they weren't able to before. But at the same time, I want to honor that people are still going to be part of these businesses, but it's a weird tension. I
Yeah.
got to admit it.
And I wonder if the biggest change in leadership, in relationships, and everything else is the pace that that needs to happen because of the technology.
Yeah,
Like, and you know, when the pace picks up on anything, when momentum is higher, friction is higher.
yeah,
Friction's higher, the heat's higher.
yeah.
Everything wears out quicker. And I wonder if that plays a role. Is that some of the tension that maybe you're relating
Yeah,
to?
I mean, I think it is. I mean, when you look at how fast the internet was adopted compared with ChatGPT or AI, and it's astounding. And part of that is that we have structures in place now that we didn't have before, but the other part is that it's just coming out so fast. Um, I think there's a big educational element to all of this that is lost on a lot of people. I know that for most of my career, there was a choice that people had, do I want to be an independent contributor or a manager? You see this a lot in tech companies. You can take a different track, be an independent contributor, head down. I'm great at coding. I love this stuff. I want to do this versus I'm going to have 10 people report to me and I'm going to have to deal with the politics and the egos. And in addition to maybe kind of digging in and doing some product work. And I know a lot of people that were like, I'm not doing management. I just want to be an individual contributor and do my thing and be part of a team, and that's fine. But play my part. And I think especially a lot of people in the technology space are going to have to learn how to be better managers because they're not going to have a choice.
Wow. That is a powerful place to end. Boaz, I'm so happy you joined me. Thank you for joining me today.
I had a great time talking with you. Super fun.
Super fun.